first thing you always got to do, read the problem. So it says to graph the following equation and find the following characteristics. So the problem says the Honey Baked Ham store tracked how many hams they sold for Thanksgiving during the month of November. If they sold 2 hams initially and sold 4 times as many each day, answer the questions and graph the equation. So first thing that's going to make this easy is just write the equation. So I'm going to have y equals, how many did I sell to start with? 2. So A is 2. So I'm going to write 2 and then a parentheses. How many times does it increase? 4 times as many each day. So that means inside the parentheses, I'm going to write a 4. What's the next thing I have to write? Not 31. X. Where did I put X? So that's my equation. From here, I can graph now. So after 0 days, how many hams did I sell? 2. So it's going to be about somewhere in there. And I want to change colors so it's easier to see over the black. After 1 day, how many hams did I sell? 8. So it's just a little bit below 10. After 2 days, how many did I sell? 32. Three days. Alright, so way up here somewhere, right? So from there, I'm going to connect my points. Pretty good connection, right? Pretty happy. That's one of the best ones I've done. Mm-mm. Does it increase the same from day to day? Then it won't be a straight line. Here we can circle increase because it is increasing. So we skipped ahead a little bit. There is no x-intercept. My domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. What about my range? What's my range?
0.
Okay. Range are my y values. What's the smallest y value I have?
2.
2. And I drew that on the wrong one. Now what's the highest it can go? Are we sure? Think back to the question. How many? It says, what are we looking at? The month of November, right? So at some point, does this stop? How many days are in November? 31. So what do you think we're going to have to do? Plug 31 into the equation. It's going to be a really long number, but we can write it as an abbreviation. So there's 30 days in November? There's 30 days in November. I thought there was 31.
I just checked.
Gotcha. Isn't there like a little hand trick? Yeah. I don't know the hand trick though. Okay. Plug in 30 into your calculator. Yes, into the equation, into the calculator. Okay. So I'm going to say 2.31. I'm going to rewrite that stuff. E to the 18. Now, how many people know what E means? It's a representation for something called scientific notation. So instead of the calculator putting times 10 to that power, like you normally see it, they just write E to the power. So that's the same thing as saying 2.31 times 10 to the 18th power. That's just an abbreviated version of this. So that's a lot of hams, right? They made a lot of money with that. Plugged 30 into the calculator. Alright. Now, this is a little off. Y-intercept. What's my y-intercept? Where it crosses the y-axis, which is 0, 2. It touches. See how it touches right here? It's not on 0. It's the initial start value that we had. How many hams did we sell to the beginning? 2. Our graph doesn't actually show the number 2, but we can say that 2 is almost really close to 0. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is called discrete and continuous. Discrete means that you have a certain amount of points that your graph touches. But continuous means that the graph goes on and on and on. So it's discrete. Does everyone agree with that? So for at any point that the graph stops, then it's discrete. But if it continues for infinity, then our graph stops. Or our graph is continuous. Okay, rate of change. How many people remember how to find rate of change? How? Okay. So I'm going to use the point slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. To find out what y2 is, I have to plug in my second x value into the formula. So if I plug in 6 for x, what do I get? Oh, it keeps messing up. So if I plug in 6 for the x, I'm going to get 8,192. What happens if I plug in 3 for x? I get 128. And then I'm going to take my x2 value, which was 6, and subtract my x1 value, which was 3. So what's 8,192 minus 128? So, got what? This, I use this formula, okay? To get y2, no. To get y2, I have to plug in my second x value back into the formula. So take 6 and plug it into x into the calculator. What do you get?
That's just for Y2.
That's just for y2. Okay. To get y1, I plug x1 in for x into the calculator. I have to use both. We use 6 right here and 3 right here.
So Y2 minus X2 minus Y2.
No, it's y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So we plug in whatever we found for this in here, what we found for this here, plug in 3 for x into the formula. What'd you get? 128, right? So I plugged in 128, because 128 is y1.
So the number on this side is going to be Y1, the number on that side.
y1, or is not y, it's x. x1 is your smallest number, x2 is your biggest number.
And then you plug in.
It's not an order paired, it's an interval.
And then you plug in interval substitute Y2.
Yes. Okay? So when we plug 8,192 and we subtract 128, you should have gotten 8,064, correct? I'm going to go back to blue. I'm going to divide that by 6 minus 3. What's 6 minus 3? So my rate of change from the interval 3 to 6 is 2,688. I want everyone to kind of look at this problem, and I want y'all to see something. There's a mistake. Think back to the problem. Think back to our x values. Do I continue? If we're just looking at the month of November, my domain's wrong. Why? For the month of November, do I have infinity days? So what should my domain really be? No, because domain are our x values. So what's our smallest x value? What's our largest x value? Sorry, I have 31 on the brain, because that's what y'all had told me originally. Are there any questions so far? Alright, so that's just kind of a review over what y'all learned last week. So today we're going to get into where we're given 2 different functions and we're comparing them. So for now, I want y'all to understand that this table is not the same as this graph. They're not the same equations. Okay? And it wants us to answer questions over each of the table and the graph. So let's look at the table. My equation. What is A? 1. How do I find what goes inside the parentheses? Don't subtract the previous. Divide by the previous. So we're going to take any term. So let's say 3. I'm going to take 3. and I'm going to divide by the previous term, which is 1, so that gives me 3.
Why wouldn't you?
It's because we're seeing the growth factor. That's what we're trying to find. So we have to divide. Yes. So what's my domain? Oftentimes does our exponential functions ever stop? No. So if it never stops, if we're not given context to an exponential function, what would our domain be? Negative infinity to positive infinity. Because it was given context to the problem. They gave us boundaries. Because it says that we're only looking during the month of November. This one, we're not given any context, we're just given a table. So what would my range be? Would it be 1? Zero to infinity. What about x-intercept? Y-intercept? Are we increasing or decreasing? And the last part it asks us for is the rate of change. Yes.
Is there ever going to be an x-intercept?
Not in these. There's a potential that you could have one, but oftentimes no. I'm not going to say it's never going to happen, but oftentimes no.
Is Y2 your biggest number or the smallest number?
Okay, if it's increasing, then y2 will be your biggest number. If you're decreasing, y1 will be your biggest number. So if I'm using my the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, it's going to be 3 minus 1 at the bottom. What's my first number on the top? So what's my rate of change? Alright, so let's look at the graph. It asks us for the equation, so I'm going to write y equals, what's my initial start point? Or where it crosses 1. It's where the graph crosses the y-axis. 1/2 will go inside the parentheses, because they gave us a little hint. It says each y value is half of the previous y value. So that's basically saying if you take let's say, this value, 0, 1, and you take the previous value, -1, and this isn't a graph because you can't really see it all that well. It's saying that if I take this and I divide by that, my answer will give me 1/2. That's what this hint means. And then I just have to include my x variable in the exponent. So what's my domain? Negative infinity to positive infinity. What's my range? My range, negative infinity, is down here. It's 0 to infinity. Remember, you always write the smallest number first. So my range is going to be 0 to infinity. What's my x-intercept? What's my y-intercept? Am I increasing or decreasing? And now let's just find the rate of change. I heard someone say 3. Do y'all agree or disagree? Disagree, why? Okay, remember it's y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Okay, what's your y2? 8 minus what's y1? So negative 3 is there. Negative 1 is here. Okay. Remember, y2 and y1 goes with x1 and x2. If I'm reading it from left to right, it would be 2 minus 8 over negative 1 minus negative 3. Remember, x1 is your smallest value and x2 is your biggest value.
2 minus 8 is 6.
Time out. 1 minus a negative 3. So that becomes a positive. So negative 1 plus 3 is a positive 2. Negative 6 divided by a positive 2 gives me negative 3. So my rate of change was negative 3. Are you okay? Okay. Oh, that's the different page. Alright. So this question says, during the summer, insects are increasing at an alarming rate in the southeast USA. Compare the two states below for the first 4 weeks of the summer. So the first thing he wants us to do is write the equation of each. For Alabama, we start with 200 insects and it triples every week. So what's my initial? Remember, this is the same thing as saying y equals, so I don't have to write y equals. What goes in the parentheses? Since it triples each week, 3 goes in the parentheses. Oops. So that's my formula for Alabama. What about my formula for Georgia? How much did I start with? How much does it increase by? So that's going to be my formula for Georgia. The second part of this equation, we're still using this information above for the next question. The first characteristic it asks for is the y-intercept of Alabama. What's the y-intercept for Alabama? It's not 0.
600.
y-intercept. What's the x value for a y-intercept? 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 for x. 3 to the 0th power is what? 1. Anything to the 0th power is always 1. So 200 times 1 is 200. You can, but you'll see in a second why I wrote it that way. The y-intercept of Georgia. 1,000. Now, the column in the middle wants you to put less than, greater than, or equal to. So is the insect population initial start point, is it greater in Alabama or Georgia? You don't have to, guys, but this is a comparison. So we're not really looking at the whole thing. We're looking at how many insects started at the beginning. So which state had a greater insect population at the very beginning? Georgia. So I'm going to put that in the middle column. So after 4 weeks, what's my insect population in Alabama?
16,000.
In 4 weeks in Georgia, what's my insect population? 16,000. Which one had a greater population?
Alabama.
So I want y'all to try to find the rate of change of Alabama and the rate of change of Georgia. Thank you. Okay, so once I plug in for rate of change the 16,200 minus 600 divided by 4 minus 1, you should have gotten 5,200. How come a lot of people had the next one blank? If you got this one, you should have been able to get the next one. So?
I just rounded it 6.6.
Decimals aren't bad.
I just rounded it up to 4.6.
It's like y'all think decimals are contagious or something. So you should have gotten 4,606. .67. It's okay to round. It didn't give us any like specific decimal points to round to, so if you rounded, that's okay. So Alabama has more. To me, in the beginning of the year, the summer, I'd rather live in Alabama, less bugs. But at some point, I'd want to move back to Georgia. Not as many as bugs.
How do people count bugs?
They use probability, like they just take a small sample and then use that sample to estimate the population.
Like you said, a sample. If they can estimate. It's not
Yeah.
really a guess. It's not really a guess because they do sampling. Like I know this sounds weird, but they like mark bugs. Let them go, and then they come back and see. Yeah, I know. Somehow they mark them. I know.
Take like a marker and just put like a dot on them. Alright, so the next problem says that Thomas County Central and Thomasville High are having a competition to see how many students they can have retweet a rumor about the other school. Thomas County Central has 25 kids originally retweet the rumor. And then 3 times as many kids retweet it after each hour. Thomasville High retweets are represented by the table given. So this is Thomasville High. So we're going to write an equation for each school and then answer the questions below. First thing you have to write, y equals. How many people or kids originally retweeted the rumor? So we're going to put 3 inside the parentheses to the x power. So the question was, which school starts off with the most original retweets? Thomas County Central. And the board is skipping. Which school has more students retweet during the hours 1 to 3? Does anyone need to see that worked out? The rate of change? No, it wants us to find the rate of change within the 1 to 3 hours in Thomasville Central and the Thomasville High. Not all the time. Did you work it out? How do you know that's right? I could be wrong. Just because the inside the parentheses is bigger doesn't mean the rate of change is going to be bigger. You can't just always assume that. Prove it. Okay, so the next page that y'all have